Hey everyone, Brandon here, back at the Wellstead, today for a very special episode, because in today's video we're finally going to be ordering the trees to begin reforesting certain areas of our woodland. So I'm just walking up here to our farm, and to start with we're going to look at the progress on our fundraiser, and then we'll go around and have a look at the different areas that we're going to be planting the trees in. Okay, so firstly, let's check the progress on our GoFundMe fundraiser. So we're going to go on to GoFundMe, okay, and we're going to search the Wellstead. And there we are, and it looks like £100, that's brilliant, that's absolutely amazing. So we have raised £100, and what that means is that we can begin to start buying the trees to start reforesting the areas of this woodland. Now, as I've said in previous videos, we're not completely relying on the donations that we've received for this project. Of course, this is a project we've decided to take on ourselves, and therefore we will be using our own funds. But the reason that we set up the fundraiser is to give you guys, our viewers, the opportunity, if you want to contribute to a small rewilding project like ours and see the real world impact that your small donation can have. And for every donation that we receive, we'll be matching that with our own funds. And the fundraiser is still open, so if you guys want to, head down to the link in the description below and check out the fundraiser. And of course, you can support our work in other ways by hitting like on this video, subscribing to the Wellstead, and sharing our videos with friends and family who you think might enjoy the work that we're doing here. So with that said, let's go outside and have a look at the different areas that we're going to be replanting the trees in. So the first area that we'll be replanting trees is right outside of our greenhouse, right here. And we'll call this area Zone A for two reasons. One, it's right next to our main work area, which means it is more accessible for us to cart the tree saplings in and out of this area so that we can begin planting the trees right in the soil here. But the second reason why this is Zone A is because it sits right between two very healthy patches of closed canopy woodland, and therefore might have a higher chance of succeeding in the long run. Those two patches are composed of predominantly beech, oak, birch and hornbeam, with some ash and other trees, which will determine the species that we're going to be planting here in Zone A. And this will be the site that we're planting in first, as it's a main priority to help kickstart the regeneration and speed up the succession of this clearing. We'll be implementing a system known as the Miyawaki Method, which mimics natural forest succession. Whereas usual tree planting techniques plant trees in rows of one sapling per square metre, the Miyawaki Method plants 3 to 5 different saplings in a square metre and of varying species. And rather than planting in a strict grid pattern, you plant sporadically around the area so that the trees have a higher chance of maturing and less chance of competing for resources in such a tight space. But we will also be planting a deer fence around this enclosure to protect the trees for at least their first year. So that's Zone A. Now let's head over to Zone B. This area is right on the western boundary of our property and is a very unique area. I call this zone Dead Ash Creek because it is a clearing filled with standing dead or dying ash trees, or Fraxinus excelsior, which have been hit hard by the ash dieback disease. For ecological purposes, we'll probably be leaving these standing dead trees as habitat for bats, birds, insects and fungi. However, there's something else very interesting about this area, because Zone B sits in a small basin in the land, right next to the only natural body of water here, our lake. This means that at certain times of year, the lake water overflows and runs down through this area, forming a creek that runs off down into the road. And when you look at the soil type in this area, it's quite different to the dry clay-like soil up on the hill, and therefore the species composition in this area will be different. And of course, this will inform how we go about restoring this particular area. We need to conduct a few more surveys and ecological assessments, but if there is potential for greater biodiversity gain by planting a mix of different trees more suited to a wetland environment, like alder, aspen, willow and black poplar, then that is something that we will need to consider before we start reforesting in this zone. And finally, Zone C. Compared to Zone A and B, this area is by far the healthiest. And in fact, it might be one of the healthiest areas of the woodland overall. However, if we look at the diversity of trees here, it's pretty low. This is another area that was logged once upon a time, though not nearly as intensively as Zone A. Nevertheless, this seems to be an area dominated by beech trees, with a few ancient yews tucked away in amongst them as well. For this reason, this isn't a top priority zone. However, we'd still like to increase the diversity of this area by introducing some other broadleaf species to diversify the canopy and create a forest with varying stages of succession. Another thing about Zone C is that although this area is absolutely beautiful, if we turn around, we have yet another area filled with dead bracken and dominated by the invasive cherry laurel. So Zone C will begin in this healthy area here and gradually expand until it eventually meets up with Zone B over there. So those are the three main areas that we're going to be beginning our reforestation in. And now the only thing left to do is to buy the trees. But before I go spending hundreds of pounds on trees, we first need to know what species of trees are we going to be buying. Because the difference between conventional tree planting and reforestation for nature restoration is understanding what is known as the PNV of an area, or the potential natural vegetation. Essentially, what species would naturally occur in an environment were it not for human intervention and species dispersal. And so since our reforestation project is all about restoring the natural ecosystem of our woodland, then we need to ensure that we're getting the right species in there, because we're not just planting trees, we are in effect speeding up the process of natural forest succession and woodland regeneration. And so a great resource that I've got here is a poster of native UK woodland trees by our friends at the Woodland Trust. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over each of these different tree species and discuss whether or not we are going to be considering planting each of these in our own woodland. Okay, so first on the list is alder, or Ulmus glutinosa, and this is a tree that really favours damp, almost boggy soils. And there are definitely a few alders growing around our woodland, and there's one in particular growing right next to our farm in Zone A. But I feel like this would be a great tree to plant in Zone B, again in that really quite wet and boggy area. And this is a tree that you'll often find in wet woodland environments. So if we're going to try to mimic that environment, or at least choose species that are suited to the conditions of that area, then alder I think will be a great one. And next up we have ash, and the tree that I think has the coolest Latin name of any tree, Fraxus excelsior. And of course, as I pointed out earlier, we do have quite a few ash trees in our woodland, but the majority of them have succumbed to the ash dieback disease. And so, although ash was once upon a time one of the most common species of tree that you would find in UK woodlands, unfortunately nowadays it is quite rare, and when you do see one like in our woodland, they are just, it's like a graveyard of ash trees. So for that reason, I don't think we're going to be planting any anytime soon, because I have a feeling that any we plant might just, again, fall victim to the ash dieback disease, when we've re-established a canopy so that perhaps the other trees surrounding the ash tree will shelter it from the ash dieback disease. But for now, the ash tree is going to be one that we're avoiding. Next up is aspen, or Populus tremula. Now, aspen is a very fast-growing pioneer species, which means that just like birch, aspen is a pioneer species, and therefore is one of the first species to move in and begin that regeneration of an area after some sort of natural disturbance, or in this case, the felling of the native canopy. And so absolutely aspen will be planted in zones A, B and C, because it is such an essential tree for forest regeneration, and also in the autumn time it turns this beautiful, beautiful yellow colour and the leaves tremble in the breeze, so I'd love to see that around the woodland. And number 4 on the list is the European beech, or Fagus sylvatica. Now this is a species that needs no introduction. Our woodland, like many ancient woodlands in the UK, is a beech forest. So beech is one of the primary trees in our woodland, and we'll be planting as many of those as we can. Similarly, up next we've got downy birch and silver birch, again 2 native pioneer species like the aspen. And in fact, the most healthy area of forest regeneration that I have seen is just up the top of Zone A on the hill, where we already have a very healthy patch of birch regeneration. No question there, birch trees, Zone A, B and C. And after birch is the wild cherry, or Prunus avium. Now this is a tree that we do have a few of dotted around in the woodland, especially sort of between zones A and B. And so as such, it's definitely a tree that, you know, belongs there and that we're going to be planting more of. I think to begin with though, if we were to plant the wild cherry, it would probably be along the boundary of our dead hedge. And as part of our permaculture farm project right next to zone A, then having some wild foods that are not only going to serve the permaculture farm, but also provide habitat and benefits to local wildlife is just the perfect border trees. Next up is witch elm, or Ulmus glabra, and I've got to be honest, I don't think I've seen this tree in our woodland before, but I find it hard to believe that there aren't any there at all, so I will have another look out for them. I think witch elm would be much more suited to zones B and potentially C. Zone A is definitely more of trying to increase that natural spread of the deciduous beech forest up at the top of the hill. And so witch elm would do great in those other areas. And we'll speed run the next three: hawthorn, hazel and holly. Again, trees that need no introduction. They form the crucial shrub layer in almost every deciduous woodland. So they form this sort of natural boundary around the bigger trees like beech and oak. And they not only protect them from browsing from deer, but there is even some evidence to suggest that they can actually help the trees grow as well. And next up is hornbeam. Now, hornbeam is another tree that we've got plenty of in our woodland, but it's not an essential tree that we need to plant loads of because, again, the population of hornbeams in our woodland is quite healthy and thriving. The next two, large leaf lime and small leaf lime. And again, this is another species like witch elm. I'm not entirely sure how essential it is that we plant more of these. I think if we were, it would be confined to zone C, just to increase the diversity of the area. Zone C is much more suited to those sorts of trees because the canopy is established. We just want to increase the diversity. It's really in zones A and B that we want to prioritize the regeneration of the woodland. And next up we have field maple. Now, as far as I'm aware, I have never seen a field maple in our woodland. We do have sugar maple and we also have the hybrid sycamore maple, but I don't think I've ever seen a field maple. And so I think it definitely would be beneficial to get some of them in. Again, not a priority, but perhaps would add some nice diversity and colour to zones A and C. And again, the next two, English oak and sessile oak, two trees that need no introduction and no explanation. Of course, we've got plenty of beautiful, massive, ancient veteran oaks in our woodland. They are keystone species in a woodland ecosystem supporting, you know, thousands of different species in their canopies. No question there, we're going to be planting plenty of oak trees around the woodland, especially in zones A and C. And the next tree on the list is quite an interesting one, Scots pine. And in fact, one of my favourite trees as well. I've grown up around Scots pine my whole life because they've been introduced to the rest of England and they are absolutely beautiful. They've got this lovely sort of rusty reddish brown bark and oh my god, the pine needles on Scots pine, absolutely beautiful smell. In fact, look here, I've even got a Scots pine essential oil bottle because I just love the smell so much. And there was a time where I was considering planting Scots pine in our woodland because when we eventually cut down the last remaining Douglas firs in our woodland, I thought introducing Scots pine would be a nice way to add some diversity to the canopy. However, I've since sort of changed my mind on that because although Scots pine is native to Britain and has of course naturalised in the southern regions of Britain, it's not one of the trees that we would naturally find growing in our woodland. And next up we have black poplar. And poplar, I believe, is another tree like alder that likes really damp soils. And so perhaps if we were to plant some black poplar, it would be around zone B. And next up, rowan. Similar to Scots pine, rowan is a tree that's mainly native to sort of the northern regions of Britain. That's not to say that you don't find them down here. Again, they have sort of naturally spread and been introduced. But because I have never seen a rowan tree in our woodland, I don't think I'm going to be rushing to introduce them. Again, perhaps one day it might be a nice addition to add a few of them here and there. Not one of our priority trees at the moment. And next up is a really rare tree, wild service trees. Now, wild service trees are rarely viable in many different soils, and yet they are a key ancient woodland indicator. I have never seen one in our woodland. It would be cool to get them in one day, but I know that they are particularly hard to germinate, and so I don't think we're going to be getting any of those in anytime soon. And the next two, crack willow and white willow. Again, two trees that need no introduction. Zones B, they're going to thrive in, and around the pond itself, around the lake, they will be beautiful. Definitely much better than the Douglas firs and cherry laurel that are currently dominating the lake. And next up, white beam, another sort of odd tree that is very common in woodlands, but I've never seen them in our woodland. Perhaps they're buried deep in rhododendron ridge somewhere. Although they do provide benefits to wildlife and biodiversity, again, I'm going to be prioritising, at least for this first round of tree planting this year, we're going to be prioritising the other species, and we'll get around to adding some more diversity like the white beam one day down the line. And finally, last on the list is, of course, the beautiful yew tree, one of the oldest living species of trees in the world. In our woodland, but not on our property, there is a yew tree that has been dated professionally, and it is 1,750 years old, which is insane. And like I said, it's in the woodland environment, but it's not on our property. So it's part of the same ecosystem and part of the same wooded area, but it's not actually on our property. We do have several old yew trees growing in our woodland though. I have no idea how old they are. Just recently I found a very young yew tree growing up at the top of Zone A where the birch regeneration is. So it's a very promising sign. Yew trees are a very special tree, but they're not really meant to be such a prevalent tree. A little bit like oak, they just want to be here and there, and they grow very old and do very well when they are in a woodland, but they don't dominate a woodland. And so yew trees, I don't think we're going to be rushing to plant any of those anytime soon, but I think it would be really cool to at least plant a few to know that the sapling that we're putting in the ground will live for potentially thousands of years after we're gone. So there we have it. That's our list of native UK woodland trees, and we've sort of sorted them out into a priority list of what we want to be introducing first. But when it comes to reforestation, it's not just about what trees you're planting, it's about how you plant them. So I mentioned earlier that we're going to be planting these trees using a technique known as the Miyawaki Method. But I think the best way to demonstrate what the Miyawaki Method means is to come down here to my local playing field, where there is actually a quite large patch of trees growing in a similar way to the Miyawaki Method. I don't know the context of this area, so I don't know if this has been replanted using that method, but nevertheless it's a great visual example of how the Miyawaki Method aims to, again, mimic those natural forest succession patterns. And you can see just how densely crowded this whole area is. And like I said, I'm not sure if this has been planted in this way or if perhaps this is natural woodland regeneration here. This multi-generational canopy starting to establish with these taller oak trees here dominating the canopy. Looks like some more willow there, some more oak, and oh, down here it looks like, is that aspen? And aspen is a great pioneer species because it grows so quickly. I believe this is aspen. And the leaves tremble in the breeze, so they're sometimes known as quaking aspen. Looks like some old dried up bluebells here. The bluebells have just gone away now that April's over, but now they have their seed pods, which will burst open later in the summer and help scatter the seeds. And up here it looks like, I believe this is thistle here, which we also have a stray thistle growing in our greenhouse at the Wellstead. Some St. John's wort growing down there, and I believe this might be comfrey down here, I'm not too sure. What is that? That looks exotic. Is that an invasive plant or is that native here in the UK? Someone will have to let me know, I've never seen that before. So like I said, I'm not sure if this has been planted this way or if it's just grown naturally. But either way, it perfectly encapsulates that whole idea of a mini forest, you know. This very dense understory with various different native species all growing in clusters together, and also supporting an array of different understory shrubs and plants. And down here it looks like these, I believe these are just the saplings growing from the acorns of these larger oak trees here, and some lovely willow here. So whether this was planted this way or not doesn't really matter, because this is exactly what the Miyawaki Method aims to imitate. Most tree planting efforts plant trees in very, very uniform, you know, grids with maybe a metre between each tree, and the whole idea behind that is to minimise competition between the trees and to maximise light availability for each tree. However, what that fails to account for is how certain species are going to support each other to grow. Here we go, here's a perfect example. So I've just found some lovely hawthorn growing in here, and you've got to watch your fingers on these because they are very spiky. And right next to this hawthorn we've got another oak tree growing. Now hawthorn and oak actually support each other. Looks like maybe a white beam here, another one there, some hazel, definitely a good sign. And again, another lovely example here of the hawthorn and the oak trees growing together and supporting each other in symbiosis, which is often, you know, those crucial interactions are often missing in most tree planting projects. And a lovely silver birch here, which I think is the tallest tree of the whole canopy, which is unsurprising given that, you know, silver birch is one of those pioneer species that will quickly move in and establish tree cover in a previously cleared area. I think I've just been bitten by something on my leg. Ooh. Walking around in long grass with only shorts on, probably not the best idea at this time of year. So I've just found some signs that perhaps this area was planted using the Miyawaki method. You can see an old tree guard there and another one just through there. We've got some other trees around here, so it's cool to see that, you know, this is my local playing field right near my house, and it's cool to see that there are some efforts for nature restoration going on so close to home. Come on, let's get a proper look at what's going on inside here. So yeah, you can really see the inside of this forest now. Let's do a little ID check. We've got some, is that horse chestnut there? And what is that? Is that sweet chestnut? What is that? Beautiful young oak tree here, growing underneath all of the older ones. Again, looks like white beam up there maybe. What is this? Is this more willow? I'm not too sure about that one. A young rowan tree growing inside here as well. Another pioneer species. And you can really see how this sort of environment is going to provide crucial habitat for so many different animals and birds. There we go, another sign of the planting there. So it's cool to see that this mini forest was intentionally planted this way. And ultimately it's this same kind of environment that we're going to be aiming for when we're planting the trees in our own woodland. Now, I'm not sure how long it takes for a mini forest or Miyawaki forest like this to establish to this sort of size, but I do know that compared to conventional tree planting methods, the Miyawaki method has a 99% survival rate of its trees. And again, it's because of those crucial relationships and connections between the different tree species. It's not all about competition and aggression in nature. You know, these species are supporting each other and are helping each other grow, both by creating this sort of microclimate in this mini forest and also by sharing resources through their root systems and the mycorrhizal fungi that grow underground. And when you plant trees in one tree per square metre in this very unnatural grid, like most tree planting methods do, you don't get those same connections and relationships forming in the soil and between the canopy. I love it. Now that I've discovered this place so close to home, I know where I'm coming for every hot day in the summertime. Okay, so now that we know what trees we want to be planting and how we want to plant them, it's time to water some trees. So we're going to be purchasing from the Woodland Trust because I have worked with the Woodland Trust in the past, and of course they are the go-to nature conservation charity for woodlands in the UK. They've been a great help to us in giving us some advice for, you know, how we want to prioritise our work in the Wellstead. And on their website they actually sell subsidised trees a little bit cheaper than you can find them elsewhere. So here we go, we're going to the Woodland Trust website. I'm not affiliated with the Woodland Trust, I'm not being paid to say this by the way, I'm just genuinely giving them a shout out because they are, of course, you know, the UK's largest woodland nature conservation charity. They will help small landowners, help them sort out their priorities. So again, shout out to the Woodland Trust. So you can see here they actually sell landowner trees. Now, again, I'm not being paid to say this at all, just genuinely just telling you where to go looking if you are looking for some trees. Different mixes here, urban tree packs, and they do different packs of trees and tree mixes here. So you can, you know, wildlife tree pack here, wild harvest, year-round colour, or you can go and get individual trees like this here, and you can choose individual species and the quantity that you want. And so with the funds that we've raised so far on our fundraiser, it means we can buy quite a few trees using their subsidies tree pack. So I'm going to go ahead and select those trees and then we'll pay for them, and then that will be that. Okay, there we go, all gone through. So we've purchased the trees, and that means that we can now begin the first stage of reforesting our woodland. And again, I just want to thank all of you who contributed to this fundraiser, because this wouldn't be possible without you. And like I said, the fundraiser is still open, and this is, you know, an ongoing project. It's not just planting one round of trees. Like I said, when it comes to reforestation and speeding up that natural regeneration of a woodland, you'll only be planting quite frequently so that you have a nice diverse canopy and multi-generational trees to support each other. So now that these trees are purchased, we can go ahead and store them in the greenhouse until autumn time when tree planting rolls around. Our intention was to do it this spring, but we got so caught up with other projects at the woodland, as well as different personal things that have been going on in our own lives, that we unfortunately missed this tree planting season. And I'm going to be away now for a few weeks this summer, so it won't be long after I'm back until we can start planting those trees. And a lot of you guys on the channel have also been asking about volunteering. And if that is something that you are interested in, and you've made it to this point in the video, firstly, click like and hit subscribe. But also, if you are interested in volunteering, then definitely keep an eye out on our YouTube posts and our community page, as well as over on our Instagram, which is just at the Wellstead Rewilding, the same as it is here on YouTube. And I think the perfect first job, the first task to start our volunteering work with will of course be planting the trees in Zones A. And it's definitely something that we want to do. You know, we sort of need the help. We're only a small family-run rewilding project, but it's also a way to give back to you guys if you want to come and help us out. So definitely keep an eye out on the channel and go over to our other social media to check that out. But again, I just want to thank all of you who contributed to this fundraiser. It's been absolutely amazing to see how many of you share the same passion as us and you want to support a small rewilding project like ours. And next spring, we're going to have a whole new wooded area. It's going to be absolutely amazing. So thank you for watching this video, guys. Again, the fundraiser is still open, so go over there, check that out if you want to continue to support our work. Otherwise, just hit subscribe, share our videos with your friends. And I will see you all in the next episode at the Wellstead. Thanks, guys.